Welcome back to Autumn Ridge. We're so glad that you are a part of this service on this Father's Day weekend. And I want to say happy Father's Day to all the dads who are watching, all the granddads, all the father-in-laws who are watching. I want to say happy Father's Day to all the men who maybe you're not a biological dad, but you're playing the role of a dad. And I want to welcome in all the men. And you may not be a dad, you may not be playing the role of a dad, but you're a man who wants to leverage your influence for the good of others. And you're using your influence to the best of your knowledge, to the best of your ability, to influence well and to serve well others who are in your life. And I want you to be encouraged, and I want you to be celebrated today. Now, while this is a message that really targets dads, and this is a message that really targets men, this really is a message for everyone. And I'm going to make a prediction. I don't think this is a bold prediction, but this is a message that I think will actually benefit everybody, no matter who you are or what your background is. I'm going to make another prediction as well. And this prediction might be a little bit of a bold prediction. Hang with me here. There's a chance that some of the men who are watching this, if you're watching this service, if you're watching this message, and there are men in the room, there's a chance that at a moment or two, some of them might get a little bit emotional. Now, if you're watching this service and there are men with you and you catch out of the corner of your eye a guy who starts to get a little bit emotional, let me tell you what to do. Be cool, right? Just be cool. Leave it alone. Don't draw any attention to it. Be cool, man. And guys, listen, if you're thinking, wait a second, I don't want to watch something that's going to make me get emotional. Listen, you can't tune out now. Because you're brave, you're a tough guy, and you want to look like a tough guy. And if you tuned out right now, you'd look like a sissy. So now you got to stay with me, at least for the rest of the time. And so we're going to honor men today, and we're going to encourage men today. And whether you're a dad or not, biological or not, we are going to encourage you. We want to include you. And let's start here. Not all men are fathers, but all men have influence. Not all men are dads, but every single guy has influence. You have influence, whether it's with your son or your daughter or other people in your life, people who are younger than you, people who work with you, people who you coach. You have influence. You do. Unless you have utterly cut yourself off from the rest of humanity, you have influence. It's not really a question of whether or not if you have influence. The real question is this: what do you want to do with the influence that you have? What do you want to do with the influence that you have? Men, do you know why? Do you know why your influence is so important? You probably remember Frederick Douglass from history class. It was probably 150 years ago. He said something so profound. It was so insightful, and it was articulated so well that in all the years since, no one has been able to say it better than he did. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. For that reason alone, men ought to be beating the door down to volunteer in our kids ministry whenever we can have kids ministry again. For this reason alone, men ought to be beating the door down to volunteer in our student ministry. For this reason alone, men should be beating down the doors to be a part of men's ministry, to huddle up in Bible studies with and in smaller groups with other men where we refine and we build in to each other. Because it is so much easier. It is so much easier to build strong children. It's so much easier to build strong men than to repair broken men. How many broken men make up our community? How many broken men make up our church? And for those of you who are wincing at that and you're thinking that it sounds like I'm being pejorative or I'm insulting or I'm talking negatively about other men, I'm not. Listen, hear me on this one. I am a broken man. You don't become the son of an incarcerated man without being somewhat of a broken man. Over my years of being a pastor, I've talked literally to thousands of men, and what I'm going to share with you next, it's not a scientific study, it's my own straw pulse survey. It's just based on my experience with the guys that I've talked to, but over the years of being a pastor, I've talked to thousands of men, and the overwhelming majority of men are men who would say that they don't have a great relationship with their dad, that they couldn't look to their dad as a guy who they wanted to be like, or they didn't have a role model, or they didn't have a key, influential man in their life who pointed them into manhood, who pointed them into godliness, who pointed them into wholeness. and to being a healthy, strong, vibrant, sacrificial, loving, giving man. They didn't have that. I'll never forget years ago, my wife and I had a couple over for dinner. It's kind of a counseling session too. And the husband, the guy, he was like the poster image of a manly man. He had fists like sledgehammers. His beard, it had the most luxurious thread count. And he looked like chiseled granite. And he wept in my living room as he talked about how confused he was and how challenging it was for him to figure out how to be a whole and healthy man. Because like a lot of guys, like a lot of dudes out there, he did not have a great relationship with his dad. His dad wasn't a guy that he wanted to be like. And through tears, he told me in my living room, I don't know what I'm aiming at. I just know who I'm trying not to be. You know what he needed? Yeah, he needed a dad. But he could have used a man who leveraged influence to come alongside him, to have his back, to stand shoulder to shoulder with him, to root him on, to be a mentor to him, to be an influence for him. And I know, because I know some of you guys, you're thinking, I want to be that kind of guy. That's the kind of guy that I'm trying to be. I want to use my influence to bolster others. I want to use my influence to serve my wife. I want to use my influence to serve my kids. I want to use my influence to serve my community, to make my church better, to make my community better, to make my culture better. And because of you, we probably are. We're better. And as more and more of you line up to do that, we will be better. But if you're seriously interested, if you're ready to answer the call and say, I want to use my influence well, there's a challenge. Now, there's a tension point. There's a hurdle that we all have to deal with. Influence is only invited, never imposed. Influence is only invited, never imposed. If you want to have influence, you cannot impose influence on someone else. Now, you can impose control, but not influence. And the reason that we kind of sometimes opt for control is because it's quicker, because it's easier. See, control is quick. Influence is patient. Control can be harsh. Influence is gentle. Control represses and tries to hold back and sometimes even pushes down. You know what influence does? It builds up. It lifts up. Most men that I know, the overwhelming majority of men that I know, they love fixing things. The overwhelming majority, most men that I know, they love being a part of the solution. They love helping to get things right. Most men that I know really are happiest when they're needed. So guys, if I'm describing you, I want you to lean in. Listen close. Lean in, listen close. Probably the singular greatest challenge that you face, probably the singular greatest challenge that I face, if we want to use our influence well, if we want to be helpful, isn't knowing how to be helpful. You know how to be helpful. You have so much to share. Probably, maybe, just maybe the singular greatest challenge that we face is knowing how to be invited in. And so I want to ask this question. What does it take to be invited? What do you have to do? What do you have to be? What are the key ingredients that someone would look at you, and they would look at me, and they would say, I want to invite you in, because if you were a part of my life, if you spoke into my life, if you were an influence in my life, I would be better. What does it take to be invited? To answer that question, we're going to go in the way back machine. We're going to go back in history, and we're going to zero in on, and we're going to take a look at the interplay, a relationship between two men who loved each other like father and son, even though they were not biologically father and son. Do you know the name Jethro? You may know that name, you may not know that name, but I bet you know the name of his son-in-law. His son-in-law was a guy named Moses. That's right, that Moses, the Moses who stared down Pharaoh and won, the Moses who led the people of Israel out of slavery, out of Egypt and towards the promised land. And Before we dive into the text today, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we're all up to speed on the backstory. God had used Moses to go toe-to-toe with Pharaoh, and over a period of time, Pharaoh broke, and he let the people of Israel go, and there they are. They've left Egypt. They're no longer slaves. They are now free, and they're on their way to a land that God had prepared and promised for them. That's why it's called the Promised Land. But right now, they're in the messy middle. They're wandering through the wilderness, and this caravan that he's leading, it's no small caravan. We're talking like 1 million people. And you can imagine, if you go on a camping trip with 1 million people, there's going to be some conflict. And there was a lot of conflict. There was so much conflict that Moses was literally spending every waking moment of his day, every waking moment of his week being the problem solver, being the judge, being the arbitrator, helping people solve their problems. He was not just the chief problem solver. He was the only problem solver. He was the only go-to guy. And then his father-in-law met him, showed up, came for a visit, and this is what happened. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people. And they stood, they stood around him from morning till evening. And when his father-in-law, Jethro, saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What? What is this that you're doing for the people? Why? Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" What does it take to be someone who's invited in to have influence? Today, I'm going to ask you to follow the example of Jethro. And this is what Jethro does. First, he establishes this. He establishes understanding, and he asks clarifying questions. So this is what's going on for Moses every day from morning till evening, all day long, into the night, from the time that he gets up to the time he eats his dinner and goes to bed. He is surrounded by people. He's surrounded by people who are asking him for good things, asking him to do stuff for them, and it is wearing him out. And so his father-in-law, Jethro, steps in and says, "Can I ask you about this? Listen, help me understand. Tell me a little bit more. What's going on here?" And he just asks some clarifying questions. And Jethro was a guy of understanding, and he wanted to pass on understanding. And one of the best ways to do that is to ask questions. So let me ask you this. What do you think is harder to ignore? Really good questions or really good statements? What do you think is harder to ignore? People ignore statements all the time. But there's something about a good question. There's something about a question that it draws us in. It wears on us. It gnaws on us. It exposes us. See, a really good question, it's hard to ignore. And Jethro asked Moses a couple of questions, the kind of questions that Moses just could not ignore. So let me say this to you guys. You want to have influence with somebody? You want to make a positive impact on somebody? Start here. Be the best question asker you know. Be the best question asker that you know. Become the master of asking fantastic questions. Now, let me ask you this question. Have you ever heard this? There's no such thing as a stupid question. That is wrong. That is a lie. There are bad questions. There are setup questions. There are hurtful questions. Let me give you an example of a bad question. Why are you being an idiot? Right? Jethro could have started like that. You're not asking anything. You're just making an accusation with a question mark tagged on at the end. Let me give you a setup question. Ladies, don't do this now. It's not cool. Don't do this. Setup question. Who's prettier, me or my sister? Right? Ladies, don't do that. That's not cool. Here's a hurtful question. Why can't you be more like your brother? It's not a great question. That's a question that'll drive a dagger into someone's heart. There are bad questions, there are setup questions, and there are truly hurtful questions. You want to have an impact. You want to make an investment. You want to be the kind of person who's invited in. Become the best question asker you know. Be the master of asking helpful, good, clarifying questions. Sometimes, often, people come to me and they want to know about what do I do? I've got a family member who's walking away from the faith or walking away from church. I've got a friend. I got somebody who I care about, or I've got an adult child who's walking away from the faith. I don't know what to do. Here's my advice every single time: become the best question asker you know. But don't ask bad questions. Don't ask setup questions, and don't ask hurtful questions. Ask tell me more kind of questions. Ask clarifying questions. Ask questions that demonstrate that you are genuinely curious about them simply because you love them. Ask questions like this: hey, tell me more. I'm curious. Tell me more about who it is that you're reading, who you're listening to. Tell me more. And I want to hear. I want to listen. I want to know more about some of the people who've earned your trust and who've been influential with you. Where could I hear more? Tell me a little bit more about that. Here's another question you could ask. So as you're navigating this and you're thinking about important things from this new viewpoint that you're adopting or that you're leaning into, how does it answer the questions of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny? Tell me a little bit more about that. And you can ask questions like this. Tell me, what are some unresolved questions that you're still wrestling with? Become the best question asker you know. Become a master of asking clarifying questions. And listen, good questions are oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes better than really good statements. And a gravitational pull of parenting, a gravitational pull of wanting to have an impact and influence others is to make statements and to give answers. Now, absolutely, there is a time for that. Right now, I'm making a lot of statements. I'm totally aware of that. But let me ask you this. All the people who've had up-close influence with you, all the people who are up close and most influential in your life, the people who you're quickest to text, the people who you're quickest to call and who you want to hear what they have to say, are they people with a track record of being more curious or less curious in the real you? I bet the people who have the most influence up close in your life it's the same people who have the most influence up close in my life. And they're the people who are most curious about the real us. This is what happens next in this conversation. Continuing on in Exodus chapter 18, Moses answered him and said, listen, you want to know what I'm doing? You want to know why I'm doing it? It's because the people come to me and they seek God's will. And whenever they have a dispute, it's brought to me. And I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and laws. Moses' father-in-law replied, what you're doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You can't handle it alone. Just real quick. What Jethro, his father-in-law, is saying, I'm interested in you. I want what's best for you. I'm concerned about you. I want the best thing possible for you. He's not judging him. He's saying, man, I'm in your corner. I'm rooting for you. You can't handle this alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. First thing that Jethro did is he established understanding. And the second thing that he did is this right here, generosity. I want something for you, not something from you. Day after day, Moses was surrounded by gargantuan crowds of people who needed him, who wanted from him, and the things that they wanted, they were probably good things. They're coming to Moses. Hey, I got these problems. What do you say? I got a broken situation here. I need you to fix it. You're the guy. You're our guy. People are standing in line all day long, every day, just waiting to hear what he had to say. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how isolating that must have felt to be the only go-to guy? Can you imagine how lonely that must have felt? Now imagine. Can you imagine how refreshing it must have felt for someone to come in and say, listen, when there's literally like 1 million people who only want something for you, I'm the guy. I don't want something from you. I want something for you. And it was because of Jethro's generous disposition. It's because that he convinced Moses, listen, I want something for you, not from you, that he was able to slide in and get an audience with the guy, the leader, the guy who had gone toe-to-toe with Pharaoh and won. And he was able to say to the guy who everybody looked at as having all the answers, he was able to slide in and say, listen, this isn't good. This isn't good for them. But hey, most importantly, you and me right now, this isn't good for you, and I want what's good for you. Jethro was incredibly perceptive. I think Jethro understood this. Exhausted men are vulnerable men. Exhausted men are men who are vulnerable to physical breakdowns. Exhausted men are men who are vulnerable to breakdowns in emotional health. Exhausted men are men who are vulnerable to moral breakdowns. Some years ago, I was the brand new groups pastor at a church. And like all good pastors, you know what we do? We take our volunteers out for coffee to get to know them. And so one morning I was enjoying some great conversation over good coffee with one of my small group leaders. We're chatting and everything's going well. And then he asked me this question. He said, Rick, what do you think I should focus on with this group that I'm leading right now? He was a guy he was a 30-something, and just about every couple in his group were 30-something. So I said, listen, whatever study you pick right now, I really think you should focus on something that's going to help all the guys win at home. And he said, why? And I said, well, when you're in your 30s, you're still climbing the ladder. When you're in your 30s, you're still trying to carve out your career, and typically you have young kids at home. Those realities right there put huge time demands on your schedule. And when you're exhausted, you're vulnerable. And whenever that's going on, it's so easy for a couple to become vulnerable. Couples lose intimacy during that time. You become vulnerable to affairs, or you become vulnerable to routines that are harmful to your marriage. So that's why I think you ought to focus on winning at home right now. And he acknowledged that, and he thought that was okay, and we moved on. He certainly didn't get vulnerable with me in that moment. 2 months later, that same guy was in crisis counseling because he dropped a grenade on his family, blew up his marriage, and things were on the rocks because of an indiscretion that he had. And when I found out about it, it broke my heart, and I found myself saying, why didn't he let me in? Why didn't he let me be a guy who was on his team to stand shoulder to shoulder with him to help him in that moment? Here's the truth of the matter. I was new. I was brand new. I hadn't yet earned the trust. I hadn't yet laid the foundation of influence with him yet. And that's okay. But the real problem is neither had anybody else. He didn't have a Jethro in his life. He didn't have a guy who stood shoulder to shoulder with him who had his back, and he needed that. Jethro was incredibly perceptive because he recognized exhausted men are vulnerable men. Our lives are better and our lives are safer when we build in margin, when we build in breathing room into our lives. And by that, this is what I'm talking about. It's when there is space between our current pace and our limits. And when there's not space between our current pace and our limits, we end up being tired, we end up being resentful, we end up being anxious and dealing with stress and sometimes dealing with anger. And when we're in this position, it is so easy to not just make bad decisions, but to make the kind of decisions that we regret for a long, long time. And Jethro recognized, Moses, not only have you eliminated the space between your pace and your limits, your pace has exceeded your limits, and you're in danger. And because Jethro wanted something for him and not from him, he interjected himself because he loved him, because he was being generous. And so let me ask you guys, let me ask you this. If you're the kind of guy, and I'm sure you are, that you want to have a positive impact in your home and in your neighborhood, in your community, in this church, you want to have a positive impact with people that you care about, do they know that you want something for them and not something from them? Establish understanding, establish generosity, and then and only then are we ready for this one, honesty. And by honesty, I want us to think about it this way. Practice gracious candor. Let's look back at this conversation, verse 19 from Exodus 18. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. Guys, if we're the kind of guys we want to be helpful, we want to make a positive impact, there's a chance, I'm not guaranteeing, I'm not assuming anything about you, but there's a chance that we are probably more overloaded in the truth department than we are in the grace department. And if we're going to make a mistake, there's a decent chance, and maybe this isn't true of you, but there's a chance that we're going to go wrong, or we're going to get it wrong by being clear and candid while not being gracious. If you were to ask people who knew me the best, give me 10 words that describe Rick, they probably are not going to use the word gentle. I believe that being gentle is a great thing. I believe it's a mandate. I believe all Jesus followers should be gentle. I just don't yet live up to what I believe. And I've been thinking a lot about gentleness lately. And so there's this question that's been gnawing at me. It's been kicking my backside, to be honest. And I want to share this question with you. Do I ever have an excuse to not be gentle? Do you ever have an excuse to not be gentle? I don't want to answer that question for you, but I've been gripped by that question, and I'm inviting you to be gripped by that question too. Let's be honest. But as we're honest, let's practice gracious candor and not just candor. Because you want to be invited in, and I want to be invited in. And so we're going to establish understanding, we're going to establish generosity, we're going to establish honesty, and then we're going to do this. We're going to make an investment, and by investment, move from an observer to an owner. Let me show you how Jethro did this with Moses. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them the decrees and laws and show them the way to live and the duties they are to perform. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times. But have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases, they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and these people will go home satisfied. You'll be able to stand the strain, and these people will go home satisfied. You know what an observer does? Someone who's happy simply sitting in the seat of an observer, they're great at pointing out problems. But someone who's an owner, they love coming up with solutions. And the gift of a plan, if you want to be an investor in someone's life, and you've established understanding and generosity and honesty, now you can share with them a plan. And the gift of a plan can move someone to hope and energy, because it brings clarity. All of a sudden, it lightens their load, and they know how to move forward, and they can take their next step with momentum and build the kind of margin that they need and experience the kind of wisdom that they need that can come from the gift of your influence in their life. Understanding, generosity, then honesty, then investment. Do you have somebody like that in your life? I've got somebody like that in my life. I've got somebody in my life who he has unfettered access to me, and yet he would never impose himself on me. He would never impose his viewpoint on me. But when he speaks, I listen. If he has something to say to me, I'm definitely going to listen to him. He is on my wisdom team. He's the kind of guy that I look to. I don't make a major decision in life without hearing from him first. And the guy that I'm talking about, he's not just my Jethro, he literally is my father-in-law. And he has that access in my life, not just because he was cool with me marrying his daughter, although I greatly appreciate that. But all the things we've talked about that Jethro did for Moses, he did for me. And he's a guy that, like I said, he not only gave me permission to marry his daughter, but he's a guy who's modeled what it is to be a godly influence for me. He's a guy that he welcomed me with open arms. There was a time I set his house on fire. He instantly forgave me. That's a story for another time. He modeled for me what it is to work hard at home and to work hard at work. He modeled for me what it's like to begin your day every day with Bible study and prayer and trusting God with every area of life. He modeled to me what it's like to serve and to invest and to be understanding and generous and all of those things. And because of his, I'll describe it this way. He was a guy, I dance on his shoulders. We all stand on the shoulders of other people. I dance on his shoulders, and whatever kind of man I am today, I'm confident I would be a lesser man if it wasn't for his influence in my life. Do you have an influence like that in your life? Do you want to be an influence like that in someone else's life? What would it mean to you if your son or your daughter or your son-in-law or your daughters-in-law or other people in your life, whatever the relationship is, what would it mean to you? What would it mean to you if they said, I dance on your shoulders? If that would mean something to you, then we should all be encouraged to take our next step of building, understanding, generosity, honesty, and investment. Real quick, we're going to wrap up with this. I'm going to turn the corner and talk to a completely different crowd. Don't you hate it when people just butt their nose into your life and they've never been invited in? Wouldn't you like it if people waited till they were invited in? So let me ask you this question. How are you doing? How would you rate yourself at inviting in wise influence and wise counsel into your own life? My experience has been is that the people who tend to resist inviting in influence, there's an anthem that unites them, and that is, I want to create and I want to learn from my own experience. And you know what? Creating experience, establishing experiences, and learning from experience, that's great. Experience is a great teacher. It is a cruel teacher. And experience doesn't care about all the hurts and the bruises and the scars that it leaves you with. And how in the world do you bypass all those hurts and those scars and regrets and benefit from experience? Well, it comes by learning from the missteps and the mistakes and the failures of others as though they were your own. And if you want to be that kind of person, it's going to take intentionally, purposefully, inviting in influence. So let me ask you this question. What does it take to invite influence? Real quickly, it's this right here. Looking back at this story, Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose capable men from all of Israel and made them leaders of the people, officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges for the people at all times. The difficult cases they brought to Moses, but the simple ones they decided themselves. Then Moses sent his father-in-law on his way, and Jethro returned to his own country. You know what Moses did right in response to this? He embraced and expressed humility. And to embrace and express humility, part of what it takes is celebrating wise counsel. Think about how easy it would have been for Moses to say, hey, listen, I'm the leader here. I don't need you. God picked me to be the guy in charge. I'm the guy with the answers. I'm the guy with the plan. I don't need to hear what you have to say. Moses, he could have gotten his dander up and he could have postured. He could have done all of that. And instead, he let his ego take a backseat to his love for God, his love for God's people, and his love for what God wanted to do with him and through him for God's people. Andy Stanley is a pastor that I think a lot of, and he said something a number of years ago that's had a huge impact on me. He said this: leadership isn't making decisions on your own. It's owning the decisions that you make. We all have to make decisions, but the best of us, the wisest of us, we invite other people in. We celebrate wise counsel. And to let other people in so that we're not making decisions on our own, it's going to require a little bit of humility. It's going to say, you know what? I could be wrong. I recognize as much as I want to know more, I may not know as much as I need to know. I want to know what you know, because if you share that with me, you will make me better. I want to celebrate wise counsel, and that takes humility. It takes one more thing, too. It takes courage. And to have courage, it requires a number of things, but at least one thing that it requires is this: love what's right more than your reputation. When we look at this plan that Jethro came up with, it is a genius plan. It basically describes the way court systems work in our country, the way court systems work in countries around the world. It was genius. But it doesn't matter how genius a plan is. It will not stop people from complaining about it. It's just a truism of life. You stick around in any organization long enough, people get used to something. It doesn't matter how much better the new idea is. It doesn't matter how genius the change is. People are still going to complain about it. That's just the way that it is. And what Moses had to do in order to embrace wisdom and to invite wisdom, he had to say, I care about what's best for others, even if it means that they think less of me. Think about all the people who had been attached to Moses, maybe in his extended family, who had unfiltered, unfettered access to him, and now they have to go through the system. That will create some blowback. But Moses said, you know what? I have the guts to love what's right more than my own reputation. Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great if you had a Jethro in your life? Guys, wouldn't it be great if someone could say of you that you are the Jethro in their life? What would it mean to you if someone said, I'm wiser, I'm better, I'm more confident, and I dance on your shoulders? Wouldn't that inspire you to take your next step of establishing understanding, generosity, honesty, and investment? And if there was somebody who was willing to be that for you, what would keep you? What could make sense? What would be the explanation for holding back, embracing humility and courage so that you could benefit from them? I want to go back to how we started. I love that quote from Frederick Douglass. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. That is genius. That is absolutely true. And yet, even with strong homes, even with great, wise, godly men and women surrounding us, even with strong children, there's not a one of us who will build our lives in such a way that we will not be broken by sin. Sin of others and our own sin. And it is the audacious, stunning, amazing hope of the gospel that you have a heavenly Father who loves you, who wants to transform you, who wants to give joy and freedom and forgiveness to you. And he proved that through Christ on the cross. He proved, and through the resurrection, he proved his understanding, his generosity, that he's not just honest, that he is truth, and that he is invested in what's best for you. Men, we can move forward in confidence because we know that we're not alone. As we seek to invest in others, we can love others the way that we've been loved by him. But no matter where we're coming from, no matter what our family ties, no matter what our relationship status are, all of us can be confident because we know that the God who made us in his image loves us, and he wants the best for us, and he is for us, he is for you. Do you know that? And have you trusted in that? Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of dads. We thank you for the gift of being dad. We thank you for the gift of being role models and serving as influence in the lives of others. And we are so grateful for the way that you love us, and you prove to us what love is. And it's our goal that we would love others the way that you loved us. And we pray that more and more and more, that we would fall in love with you and trust you because you are a good, good Father. And it's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.